Welcome to this election show on this Friday. I'm Richard Rellis. We still have, the numbers suggest that Donald Trump has lost the state of Arizona, but there are still some who are contesting that result, and they're doing so in the courtroom. We have one court case that is seemingly wrapped up while another court case begins. Maria Paletta will join us shortly to talk about what she saw in court virtually yesterday. But we'll begin with our Republic national political reporter, Ron Hansen, to talk about the state of the race. It seems, again, the results seem to be in. Mathematically, with so few votes left to count, there aren't enough votes for them all to go to Donald Trump. But yet, he tweeted yesterday he still thinks he can win Arizona.
Yeah, so this has been part of the national angst over this election is the president sort of not facing up to a reality that he may find unpleasant, but is real all the same. The fact is, in Arizona, Donald Trump fell behind by more votes than remained to be counted. The claims of fraud or other irregularities seem relatively dubious at the moment. And in any event, the margin that he is behind by seems to be outside the threshold that they are looking to challenge anyway. It's a pretty dark path for the president moving forward in Arizona, it would seem. And this is just one of the states. Frankly, he needs to flip Pennsylvania. He would need to change the outcome in Georgia to his liking. There's just so many different paths that seem to have all closed on him, even if he won't acknowledge that fact.
Yeah, and yet he's not alone. There's supposed to be a rally tomorrow at the national capital and here in Phoenix at the state capitol. And the state Republican Party chair, Kelly Ward, has sort of made the rounds on conservative media talking about systemic voter fraud. But we've seen some Republicans go the other way. Mark Brnovich appeared on Fox Business, right, and said this is done.
Yeah, so give the Attorney General some credit for this. He has been one of the few Republican voices to very prominently note that he sees no systemic fraud. He doesn't see something that appears to be amiss in a way that would overturn the trajectory of this election. And there are others, all of whom have experience with Arizona elections and all of whom have had success in Arizona's elections, who have, despite that, really raised questions about the propriety of the vote counting, the methods, the machines, all of it, which is contributing, I think, to an unhealthy public question about whether this election is legitimate, as we will see play out at the Capitol, both in Phoenix and in Washington.
Yeah, just today, Representative Paul Gosar, who won his reelection using these same ballots, tweeted out a theory that, the thought is, well, people like Paul Gosar, David Schweikert, Andy Biggs won, but yet the president lost. How could that be? And he's sort of tweeting this theory that races can be manipulated to affect the presidential result and down ballot races can be ignored. So, again, we can't really look in. Oh, and I guess let's put up the Kelly Ward tweet. She announced, she sort of promoted this rally at the state capitol. But on top of that, Jeff Flake responded by saying that the Republican Party can only have a bright future in Arizona if we accept the election was not stolen and that we need to move beyond conspiracy theories. And I guess, Ron, we don't know who's right here, right? Paul Gosar, Dr. Ward believe this is stolen and appear to be attempting to prove it, at least in the court of public opinion. And yet we have people like Senator Jeff Flake, our colleague Yvonne Wingett Sanchez talked to Cindy McCain, and Mark Brnovich, who are looking to try to bring people together. I guess it's really hard to assess how this plays out.
Yeah, look, it's an open question as to whether they will find any instances of something that happened that should not. But in terms of systemic fraud, something that was willful violations of election laws and just contrary to common practice, we haven't heard those kinds of allegations yet. And I'll defer to what Maria has been hearing in the courtroom, where the lawyers for the Trump campaign have really been making their case as best they can on this. But it just to this point has not really seemed plausible that they've identified the kinds of things that would wholesale change the results if they got their way. And I think that's what we're looking for is there's something that suggests that there was truly corrupt intent here. You'll always find in any system that depends on humans, there will be errors. The question is, were the errors outside the margins of the races themselves? And by all accounts to this point, the answer seems to be a resounding no, there isn't.
Right. I guess it's the question of, do the leaders discussing the veracity of the elections with us, are they doing so out of just political reasons or out of a mindset of civility? Like, do they really think there's a path forward for the president to take back Arizona and the other states? Or is this just political theater? That's something we'll find out over the next few days. We'll see how all of this shakes out. We still don't have a concession yet from Martha McSally, again, despite being mathematically down. And we'll see if that comes over the weekend. Ron, good to see you as always.
Thank you. Same.
We'll move to Maria Paletta, who yesterday it was scheduled for 5 hours. I believe it went 6 hours of telephonically correct listening to. I imagine the audio quality isn't great on listening to this hearing, and I'll ask you to go back to yesterday and distill 6 hours into about a minute and a half. What happened in court yesterday, and then we'll get to the results of today.
Sure. So yes, it ended up being 6+ hours. 5 hours was set aside for the questioning. So we of course had to argue over exhibits and everything before, and then have closing statements after. So it did take most of the day. And the very short summary is that these, initial claims of systematic, improper vote overrides, disenfranchising Maricopa County voters who voted in person on election day, outlined in the initial complaint or initial suit filed Saturday, fell apart over the course of the hearing. And the attorney for Trump's team, RNC, Arizona Republican Party, was, within minutes of the proceedings starting, insisting no one is alleging election fraud here. No one is alleging that anyone is stealing the election. This is about a few good faith errors made by poll workers, which is, of course, completely not what the initial claim says. But that was perhaps, a prescient move on his part, because when we got to witness testimony, really, it didn't support any claims of widespread misconduct or malintent. There were some anecdotal accounts of poll workers overriding machines to make sure ballots were accepted, but even those folks did not testify that they did not have any issues with their actual ballots, and they had no reason to believe that their votes hadn't been counted properly. In fact, a few of them said that it was only after Election Day, when they were either looking online or speaking with friends and family or contacted by an attorney, that they started having concerns about how their vote was counted or whether it was counted at all. So we went from these claims of a systemic problem to, at the end of the day, the ask becoming that the judge grant a motion or grant a request that Maricopa County elections officials would have to go back and manually reinspect any ballots where overvotes were identified. Again, that's if the machine registers that you pick more candidates than are allowed in a race. For any race, I'll try and put this in plain English, where the number of overvotes, is greater than the margin that the winning candidate is winning by. And that
right,
is,
like maybe there was 100 overvotes, but there's a race that is 50 votes apart, right?
Exactly. The question is, does that apply to any races in Arizona? And the Trump team attorney this morning filed another motion, acknowledging this doesn't apply to the presidential race anymore. It's moot. It doesn't apply to most of the rest of the races. He identified two, one LD28, which is Senator Brophy McGee fighting to retain her seat, and the other is a county board of supervisors district position. So I think it strains, belief, this idea that Trump's reelection team would go to court for one of the county board of supervisor seats, but that's where we are with this lawsuit right now.
Right, because so yesterday at the end of the hearing, and again, it seems like the county officials arguing and the state officials arguing that outside the courtroom, these people are making bold claims of widespread fraud. But here in the courtroom, they're saying these are, using the words the Trump attorney used, good faith errors, not systemic, just some oopsies. But after all that hearing, and as you reported yesterday, the judge seemed inclined that if there was a couple races where this could make a difference, maybe we're open to looking at it. But then this morning, and I think the beautiful phrase in the ruling or the motion was partial mootness. So does that mean that the Trump folks are going to court and saying, forget yesterday, this is now at least partially moot, at least in terms of the president race, those 6 hours didn't matter?
I think that this is sort of a move, and this is just my impression, to avoid, any ire from the judge or consequences related to having wasted everybody's time, because it was known before we got to court yesterday, or virtual court that is, that the number of potential overvotes in the presidential race was fewer than 200 when President-elect Biden was ahead by thousands of votes. So it wasn't just as of this morning that the Trump campaign figured this out. So I think this was sort of a last-ditch effort to try and lend legitimacy to what their initial claim was and how that claim has evolved, and say it's no longer relevant given where the vote count stands for president, some of these other races, but we still are interested in ensuring the integrity of these down ballot races. So we will see what happens with the judge. We're awaiting a ruling, which should come pretty soon since this is an expedited election matter. But yes, as you said, he did seem amenable to granting that if there were any races where this applied. But by the time he rules, that may or may not be the case.
And as that lawsuit fades, another one was brought in. This one's complicated. Let's try to work together to say what this means. There's supposed to be a hand audit. According to state law, there's supposed to be a hand count of precincts. But Maricopa County doesn't use precincts anymore. They use voting centers. And that's really not addressed in the state law about where the hand audits come from. Is that a decent summary?
Yes, that is a good summary. And this is referring to the hand count audit that counties do to make sure that the voting machines that electronically count votes do so correctly. And in Maricopa County, which is, as usual, those are the election officials named in this lawsuit. They've already completed a hand count for this general election. They announced on Monday, and it matched electronic counts exactly. So this is asking for an additional hand count that is done in a different way, as you said, using precincts as stated in state law versus voting centers as allowed by the Secretary of State's election procedures manual. But the Attorney General, again, who is also a Republican himself, is saying there's no legal basis for this claim. In the state statute, it does mention precincts. But if there's a case where precincts aren't being used, it defers to the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State has outlined this with approval from the governor, and other high-ranking officials, this procedure that was followed and, found complete accuracy. So he's arguing that there's really no point to this. And I honestly am struggling myself to understand what the end goal is here. because it seems to me, and I, of course, not an expert in election law, but that, if you have 175 voting centers versus 748 precincts, 2% of precincts or 2 precincts, it's whichever is greater, versus 2% of voting centers or 2 voting centers, the voting centers would actually have you auditing a larger number of ballots for accuracy. So I'm not entirely sure, honestly, what the end game is, trying to have that focus specifically on a few voting precincts.
Yeah, because it seems like what you're checking is, did the machine work, not necessarily where the votes are coming from. And again, as you mentioned, is there a path from this lawsuit to Trump winning Arizona?
There is not, in my opinion, especially if you are taking the count even smaller and having, the hand count, and having it again show, would most likely be the case, accuracy in terms of how the votes were counted electronically. If maybe there had been, some hint in this audit already done that everything had gone horribly, or a hint to that effect at any point in this process, maybe this would make sense. But I just don't think they're going to get any different result if this is even allowed to proceed.
And I guess one thing, Ron Hansen did some reporting, listening to the Charlie Kirk show. A couple of our congressmen from Arizona on that show sort of talked about a path that, if there are just enough questions about the legitimacy of the election, maybe it goes to, the electors don't get seated, Congress can take a vote. We're down like as Ron said, a dark path if the president is going to get done. But we'll see what happens in court today. We expect a ruling at least on one. What about the second?
So the second one, I am not sure. That was just the hand count lawsuit was just filed last night. So the most recent action or proceedings in that was a motion for a preliminary hearing. As of earlier this morning, that hadn't been granted or dismissed. There hadn't been action one way or another. So right now I'm waiting to see if that one proceeds at all, if it gets an initial hearing. They often tend to get an initial hearing to give each side a chance to say whether it should proceed, but I'm not sure if it'll proceed past that.
Okay, and I know you'll be on it. We'll look for updates and stories on AZ Central. Again, the vocabulary word of the day, the new phrase I'm going to try to use in my everyday life, partial mootness.
Good luck.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining us, Maria. And thank you. There's still a lot of election news. Come to AZ Central for that. The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors race seems to have, where we thought it might have been more Democrats joining. It looks like we're back where we started with a 4-1 Republican body. And there's just some still races out there. Vote counts that are still slim. We'll see what happens with some of the races that are left to be called. And the Maricopa County Recorder's race being key. Adrian Fontes, who oversaw the early voting in Maricopa County, has conceded to his Republican opponent, Stephen Riker, who he said he would take on a tour of the offices. So Fontes has graciously conceded to his opponent, apparently will not challenge the election he helped engineer. That is all for now, but obviously the political coverage on AZ Central will continue, and keep following us and reading us. Thank you for watching, and thank you for subscribing.